Good evening, and welcome to Ancient Wisdom for Deep Sleep. I'm so glad you've chosen to spend this quiet time with me tonight. Before we begin our journey together, take a moment to settle in. Find your most comfortable position, whether you're lying in bed, resting in a chair, or wherever feels just right for you. Let your shoulders drop. Allow your breathing to naturally slow, and know that for the next 2 hours you have nowhere else to be and nothing else to do except listen, learn, and let yourself drift peacefully toward rest. Tonight we're going to walk together through ancient Greece, not the Greece of wars and politics that you might remember from history books, but the quieter Greece of philosophers and teachers, of olive groves and gentle wisdom shared under starlit skies. This is a Greece where time moves slowly, where every conversation carries the weight of truth, and where the greatest adventures happen not through action, but through understanding. Our story unfolds slowly tonight, like morning mist rising from a peaceful valley. There are no sudden surprises, no dramatic moments to startle you awake. Instead, think of this as a gentle river of wisdom, flowing steadily toward the sea of sleep. Some parts may feel familiar, others may offer new insights, but all of it is designed to ease your mind and prepare your spirit for the deepest, most restful sleep. So close your eyes if you'd like, or let them rest softly on something peaceful nearby. Take a deep breath in and let it out slowly. Another breath and release. Feel yourself beginning to settle into this ancient world where wisdom flows like honey, sweet and golden and unhurried. The evening air is warm here in our ancient Greek hillside, scented with lavender and wild thyme. In the distance, you can hear the gentle sound of temple bells carried on the breeze, and somewhere nearby, the soft murmur of a stream making its way to the sea. You are safe here. You are welcome here. And you are about to discover that the deepest wisdom often comes wrapped in the simplest stories. Let us begin. You find yourself walking along a winding path made of smooth, sun-warmed stones. The late afternoon light filters through olive trees on either side, creating patterns of gold and shadow that dance gently with each breath of wind. Your feet know this path somehow, though you cannot remember walking it before. Each step feels natural, unhurried, as if you have all the time in the world to reach wherever you're going. The air here is different from the world you left behind. It's cleaner somehow, filled with the scent of herbs and the faint sweetness of honey from wild bees working in the nearby meadows. There's no urgency here, no rushing, no sense that you should be anywhere other than exactly where you are in this moment. As you continue walking, the path curves gently around a hillside, and you begin to see buildings ahead, not the harsh, angular structures of modern times, but soft, curved buildings made of cream-colored stone that seems to glow from within. These are structures built for contemplation, for quiet conversation, for the kind of learning that happens when the mind is peaceful and the heart is open. You realize you're approaching what the ancient Greeks called an academy, not a school as you might imagine it, but a sacred grove where philosophers gathered to share wisdom under the open sky. This particular academy, you somehow know, is called the Academy of Peaceful Hearts, a place where the greatest teachers came, not to debate or argue, but to explore the gentlest truths of human existence. As you enter the grounds, You notice how everything here encourages slowness. The pathways meander rather than march straight. The benches are positioned to catch the softest light. Gardens are planted not for show, but for the peace they bring to those who tend them. Even the architecture seems designed to lower voices and slow heartbeats. You pass a small fountain where clear water bubbles up from an underground spring and spills over smooth stones, creating the most gentle rhythmic sound, like nature's own lullaby. Several students sit nearby, not frantically taking notes, but simply listening as an elderly teacher speaks in low, measured tones about the nature of contentment. Further along the path, you see a teacher and student walking slowly together, pausing occasionally when the teacher wants to point out how the evening light falls on a particular flower, or how the sound of bees working teaches us about purposeful, unhurried activity. Their conversation is so quiet, you can't make out the words, but something about their pace, their attention to small details, makes you feel calmer just watching them. You continue deeper into the academy grounds, passing beneath an archway carved with words in ancient Greek. Though you cannot read the language, somehow you understand their meaning. Here, we learn not by rushing toward answers, but by sitting peacefully with questions. The main courtyard opens before you, circular and spacious, with comfortable stone benches arranged around a central area where a single olive tree grows, its ancient trunk twisted and beautiful, its branches providing gentle shade. The tree looks as though it has been here for centuries, witnessing countless conversations, countless moments of insight, countless students finding peace in its presence. It's here, under this ancient olive tree, that you notice an elderly man sitting alone on one of the benches. He's not imposing or dramatic, quite the opposite. He's small and weathered, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. His hair is white as sea foam, and his simple robe suggests someone who has learned to find richness in simplicity. There's something about his presence that draws you forward, not urgently, but with the same natural pull you might feel toward a warm fire on a cool evening. As you approach, he looks up, and his eyes crinkle with warmth. "Ah," he says softly, "I was hoping someone would come by this evening. I have some stories to share, and stories, you know, are much better when they have someone to listen to them." His voice is like honey mixed with aged wine, sweet, but with depth and complexity that comes only with time. "Please," he gestures to the bench beside him, "sit with me for a while. The evening is young. The air is perfect for storytelling, and I promise you that what I have to share tonight will be much more gentle than exciting, much more peaceful than thrilling. These are stories designed not to wake you up, but to help you remember what it feels like to be truly, deeply at rest." You settle onto the bench beside him, and immediately you feel some tension you didn't even know you were carrying begin to dissolve. The stone is warm from the day's sun, but not hot, perfectly comfortable. The old teacher's presence is like sitting next to someone who has learned all the secrets of being calm, and just being near him seems to slow your breathing and quiet your thoughts. "My name is Xenophanes," he says. Though his name seems less important than his presence, I've been coming to this olive tree for, more years than I can count. Not because I'm required to, but because this is where some of the most important learning happens. Not the learning of facts or formulas, but the learning of how to live well,
how to find peace in a world that often seems designed to steal it from us. He pauses, looking up through the olive branches at the sky, which is beginning to shift from blue to the softest pink as evening approaches. Tonight, I thought I might share with you 3 ancient stories, not the famous ones that everyone knows, but quieter tales, the kind that the wisest teachers use to tell their students just before sleep. Stories designed to plant seeds of wisdom that would grow slowly in dreams. The evening breeze stirs the olive leaves above you, creating the softest rustling sound, like whispered secrets being shared between friends. In the distance, you can hear the faint sound of temple bells, marking the end of day, and somewhere a nightingale begins its evening song. Xenophanes settles more comfortably on the bench, clearly in no hurry to begin. This is a man who has learned that the best stories cannot be rushed, that wisdom shared too quickly is like water poured into a cup with holes. It simply runs out without nourishing anyone. The first story, he says finally, is about a student much like yourself, someone who came to ancient Greece seeking answers, but found something much more valuable instead. It begins, as the best stories do, with someone who thought they knew what they needed, but discovered they had been asking the wrong questions entirely. Xenophanes adjusts his position slightly, like a master storyteller preparing to weave a tale that will last exactly as long as it needs to, and not a moment longer. The light around you has shifted to that magical golden hour that photographers love, but ancient Greeks understood was the perfect time for deep conversation. Long ago, he begins, his voice taking on the cadence of someone who has told this story many times, but never grown tired of it. There lived a young woman named Sophia. Her name meant wisdom, which her parents thought was quite clever when she was born. Though as she grew older, Sophia sometimes felt the weight of carrying such an important name. You can almost see her, this young woman from another time, walking the same kinds of paths you've just traveled. Sophia lived in Athens during a time when the city was filled with teachers and philosophers, each one claiming to have the answers to life's most important questions. There were Stoics, who taught that emotion was weakness, Epicureans who taught that pleasure was the highest good, Cynics who taught that worldly possessions were meaningless, and dozens of other schools of thought, each with their own certainties. The breeze picks up slightly, stirring the olive leaves above you and carrying the scent of wild herbs from the hillsides. Xenophanes pauses to appreciate it, demonstrating without words the kind of present moment awareness his story will explore. Sophia was brilliant, curious, and determined to find the answer, the one true philosophy that would solve all of life's problems and give her the peace she sought. She would wake each morning with great energy and purpose, rushing from teacher to teacher, school to school, gathering knowledge like a farmer gathering grain before winter. She studied with the Stoics for several months, learning to control her emotions, to accept whatever fate brought her, to find strength in discipline. And for a while, this felt right. She could face difficulties without crying, handle criticism without anger, maintain her composure, even when others around her lost theirs. Finally, she thought, I found the answer. Stoicism is the path to peace. But then her beloved grandmother became ill, and when Sophia maintained perfect emotional control at the bedside, never crying, never showing distress, her grandmother looked at her with sad eyes and whispered, My dear child, sometimes the heart needs to feel in order to heal. Your strength is beautiful, but where is your tenderness? Xenophanes pauses here, allowing the question to settle in the evening air like seeds, finding their place in fertile soil. This troubled Sophia deeply. Perhaps the Stoics were wrong. Perhaps emotion wasn't weakness, but an essential part of being human. So she left the Stoic school and sought out the Epicureans, who taught that pleasure and happiness were the highest goals of life. With the Epicureans, Sophia learned to enjoy beautiful things: art, music, fine food, comfortable surroundings. She learned to seek joy and avoid pain, to surround herself with people and experiences that brought delight. For a time, this too felt like the answer. Life became lighter, more colorful, filled with laughter and beauty. But gradually, Sophia noticed that the constant pursuit of pleasure was exhausting. There was always a better meal to find, a more beautiful sunset to seek, a funnier companion to discover. The pleasure that felt so satisfying in the moment seemed to evaporate quickly, leaving her always hungry for the next experience. And when unavoidable pain came, as it comes to all lives, she found herself completely unprepared, with no tools to handle suffering except to run from it. The temple bells in the distance chimed softly, marking another passage of time, and you realize that listening to this story is itself a kind of meditation, a gentle focusing of attention that allows deeper thoughts to surface naturally. So Sophia left the Epicureans and tried the Cynics, who taught that all possessions and social conventions were meaningless, that true freedom came from needing nothing and no one. She gave away her belongings, slept under stars, ate simple foods, and for a while felt a wonderful sense of liberation. But this path, too, revealed its limitations. In rejecting all material comfort, Sophia found she had also rejected simple human kindness. When friends offered her a warm meal, she refused it as weakness. When her family invited her to celebrations, she scorned them as meaningless social rituals. In pursuing perfect independence, she had become perfectly isolated. After trying school after school, philosophy after philosophy, Sophia found herself more confused than when she had started. Each teaching had contained profound truths, but none had provided the complete answer she sought. She began to despair that perhaps there was no answer, no path to the peace and wisdom she longed for. Xenophanes shifts again, and you notice how even his movements are unhurried, deliberate, peaceful. The man himself embodies the kind of calm that Sophia was seeking. It was in this state of confusion and near despair that Sophia encountered a teacher unlike all the others. She found him, or perhaps he found her, sitting by a small stream outside the city, not teaching a group of students, not proclaiming any particular philosophy, but simply sitting quietly, watching the water flow. She approached him hesitantly, no longer sure she wanted to hear another set of teachings, another claim to have the ultimate truth. But something about his presence was different. He wasn't projecting confidence or authority. He seemed, instead, deeply peaceful in a way that wasn't forced or performed. "Teacher," she said finally, "I have studied with Stoics and Epicureans, with cynics and skeptics, with followers of Pythagoras and students of Heraclitus. Each has taught me valuable things, but none has given me the peace I seek. Do you have the answer I'm looking for?" The old teacher looked at her with kind eyes and smiled gently. "My dear student," he said, "I think you've been asking the wrong question." Here Xenophanes pauses longer, letting this statement hang in the air like incense in a temple. You find yourself wondering what he means and realize that you, like Sophia, have perhaps been asking the wrong questions yourself. The wrong question, Sophia asked. But I've only been asking the most important question of all. How should I live? What is the path to wisdom and peace? Those are indeed important questions. The teacher replied, but notice how you've been approaching them. You've been seeking the answer, the path, the philosophy that will solve everything. But what if wisdom isn't a destination you arrive at, but a way of traveling? What if peace isn't a permanent state you achieve, but a quality of attention you can cultivate moment by moment? Sophia felt something shift inside her, like a door opening in a room she didn't know existed. What do you mean? Sit with me for a moment, the teacher said, patting the ground beside the stream. Instead of talking about wisdom, let's practice being wise. Instead of discussing peace, let's be peaceful together. The sound of the stream in the teacher's story seems to blend with the gentle sounds around you now. The rustling leaves, the distant temple bells, the soft evening breeze. You realize that Xenophanes is doing exactly what the teacher in his story did. Instead of just talking about peace, he's creating a peaceful experience. So Sophia sat by the stream with this teacher, and for the first time in months, she stopped trying to figure anything out. She simply listened to the water, felt the warmth of the sun on her face, noticed the quality of light filtering through the trees. She didn't analyze these sensations or try to extract philosophical meaning from them. She just experienced them. After a long period of comfortable silence, the teacher spoke again. Tell me, Sophia, in this moment, sitting here by the stream, do you feel peaceful? Yes, she answered, surprised by how true this was. And are you currently following Stoic philosophy, or Epicurean, or Cynic? Sophia paused. I'm not following any philosophy, I'm just sitting here. Exactly, smiled the teacher. You've just discovered something more valuable than any philosophy. You've discovered your own capacity for peace, independent of any system or teaching. The peace you seek isn't hidden in some external philosophy waiting to be found. It's already present within you, waiting to be uncovered. The realization that dawned on Sophia seems to dawn on you as well as you listen. Peace isn't something to be achieved or earned or learned from the right teacher. It's something to be discovered in moments exactly like this one. But how do I keep this peace? Sophia asked. How do I take it with me into daily life, into difficulties, into all the challenges that disturb my calm? Ah, said the teacher. Now you're asking a much wiser question. Not, what is the secret to permanent peace? But, how do I remember to return to peace? Not, which philosophy will fix my life? But, how do I cultivate the kind of attention that recognizes peace even in difficult moments? The teacher stood and began walking slowly along the stream bank, inviting Sophia to walk with him. Peace isn't a philosophy to learn, he continued. It's more like a skill to practice. Just as you learn to walk by walking, to speak by speaking, you learn to be peaceful by practicing peace over and over in small moments throughout each day. The Stoics taught you valuable tools for maintaining composure, he continued. The Epicureans taught you to appreciate beauty and joy. The Cynics taught you about the freedom that comes from not being enslaved by possessions. None of these teachings were wrong. They were just incomplete. Wisdom isn't about choosing one path and rejecting all others. It's about taking what serves peace from each path and leaving what doesn't. As Xenophanes tells this part of the story, you notice how his own approach embodies exactly this kind of integrated wisdom. He's not promoting any particular school of philosophy, but drawing from the deep well of human understanding about what creates peace and contentment. Sophia spent the rest of that day walking and talking with the teacher, but mostly just walking and being quiet together. She learned that wisdom wasn't something you could possess like a book or a tool, but something you could embody like grace or kindness. She discovered that peace wasn't a permanent state to achieve, but a way of being present to whatever was happening without resistance or grasping. When evening came and it was time to part ways, Sophia asked the teacher, "What should I call this path you've shown me? What philosophy is this?" The teacher laughed gently. "Call it whatever you like, or call it nothing at all. The name doesn't matter. What matters is that you've remembered something you already knew but had forgotten. That peace is your natural state when you're not trying to be something other than what you are in this moment." "Will I see you again?" Sophia asked. "You'll see me everywhere," the teacher replied with a smile. "Every time you choose presence over anxiety, every time you choose curiosity over judgment, every time you choose peace over drama, you'll recognize this teaching. The teacher you seek isn't a person. It's the wisdom that emerges when you stop seeking and start being." Xenophanes lets this settle for a moment, and you find yourself feeling the truth of it. The peace you've been experiencing during this story isn't coming from the story itself, but from your own capacity to be present, to listen, to let yourself settle into this moment without needing it to be different. Sophia returned to Athens that evening transformed, not because she had learned new information, but because she had remembered an ancient truth. She no longer rushed from teacher to teacher seeking the answer. Instead, she began to live each day as an opportunity to practice the peace she had discovered by the stream. She still studied with various teachers, but now she approached them differently. Instead of asking, "Are you right and are others wrong?" she asked, "What can I learn from you that will help me be more peaceful, more kind, more present to life as it actually is?" She took the Stoic practice of accepting what she couldn't change, but balanced it with the Epicurean appreciation for life's natural pleasures. She embraced the Cynic insight about not being enslaved by possessions, while still enjoying the simple comforts that supported her well-being. She studied with the skeptics, who taught her to question assumptions, while also learning from teachers who offered positive practices for cultivating wisdom. And most importantly, she learned to trust her own inner sense of what created peace and what disturbed it. She discovered that her body was a wise teacher, that feelings of tension or anxiety were signals that she was moving away from her natural state of peace, while feelings of ease and contentment indicated she was moving toward it. Years later, when younger students sought her out as a teacher, Sophia would take them to that same stream where she had learned the most important lesson of her life. She would sit with them quietly, just as that unnamed teacher had sat with her, helping them discover not a new philosophy to follow, but their own innate capacity for peace, presence, and wisdom. The story seems to conclude naturally, like a piece of music finding its way to the perfect final note. You realize that you've been transported not just by the narrative, but by the quality of attention Xenophanes brought to the telling. Unhurried, present, infused with the very peace the story describes. And that, my friend, Xenophanes says softly, is the first story I wanted to share with you tonight. The light has continued to shift while Xenophanes told Sophia's story, and now the sky above the olive tree is painted in the softest shades of pink and lavender. The air has grown slightly cooler, perfect for the deeper rest that evening brings, and you find yourself settling even more comfortably on the warm stone bench. Xenophanes seems in no hurry to begin the next story. He sits quietly for a few moments, watching a pair of doves that have landed near the fountain to drink. Their movements are unhurried, graceful, and somehow their presence adds to the sense of peace that has been building throughout the evening. The second story I want to share with you, he says eventually, is one that was told to me many years ago by a teacher who specialized in what we might call practical wisdom, not the grand philosophical concepts that impress people at dinner parties, but the simple insights that actually make daily life more peaceful and joyful. He pauses to take a slow, deep breath, and you find yourself naturally matching his rhythm, your own breathing becoming slower and more relaxed. This is the story of two gardens and two very different approaches to creating beauty in the world. It's a story about effort and ease, about forcing and allowing, about the difference between working hard and working wisely. As he begins, you notice how the evening sounds have shifted. The daytime birds have given way to gentler evening creatures. Somewhere in the distance an owl calls softly, and the insects create a subtle symphony that seems designed for contemplation rather than distraction. In ancient times there lived two neighbors, each of whom decided to create a garden. Both had similar plots of land, similar soil, similar access to water and sunlight. Both had the dream of creating something beautiful, something that would bring joy to themselves and others. But their approaches to gardening could not have been more different. The first neighbor, whom we'll call Alexios, was a man of great energy and determination. He believed that the most beautiful garden would be the result of the most effort, the most control, the most careful planning and execution. He approached gardening like a military campaign, with detailed strategies and unwavering discipline. Xenophanes shifts slightly on the bench, and you notice how even this small movement is graceful, unhurried, deliberate without being forced. Alexios began by spending weeks researching the perfect garden design. He consulted scrolls and experts, studied the gardens of the wealthy, and created elaborate plans showing exactly where each plant should go. He calculated the precise amount of water each species would need, the exact nutrients required for optimal growth, the perfect spacing to prevent competition between plants. When he finally began planting, Alexios worked from dawn to dusk, carefully measuring distances, testing soil composition, building elaborate irrigation systems. He planted only the most exotic and supposedly superior varieties, roses from distant lands, fruit trees that required special care, vegetables that needed constant attention. Every day, Alexios would walk through his garden with a critical eye, looking for problems to solve. He would prune plants that weren't growing exactly as planned, relocate ones that seemed unhappy in their positions, and constantly adjust his watering and fertilizing schedules based on the latest information he could gather. As you listen to this description, you might notice a familiar quality in Alexios's approach, the same kind of effortful striving that many of us bring to our own lives, always trying to optimize, control, and perfect our experience. Now, his neighbor, let's call her Cleo, had a very different approach to gardening. She too wanted to create something beautiful, but she believed that the most sustainable beauty came from working with nature rather than trying to control it. Instead of starting with elaborate plans, Cleo began by sitting quietly in her garden space for several days, just observing. She watched where the morning sun fell and where afternoon shade lingered. She noticed which areas stayed moist longer after rain and which dried out quickly. She observed what wild plants were already growing there, taking them as clues about what the land naturally wanted to support. The pace of Xenophony's storytelling has slowed even further, matching the deepening evening around you. His words seem to flow like honey, sweet and golden, and in no hurry to reach their destination. When Cleo finally began planting, she chose mostly native species, plants that were already adapted to her local climate and soil conditions. She selected varieties not just for their beauty, but for their ability to support each other, creating a garden ecosystem where each plant contributed to the health of the whole. Rather than fighting against the natural contours of her land, Cleo worked with them. Where water naturally collected, she planted things that loved moisture. On the slightly raised areas that drained quickly, she chose plants that preferred drier conditions. Instead of trying to make her entire garden conform to one vision, she let different areas develop their own character. Cleo's daily routine in the garden was quite different from Alexios's. Rather than rushing out with a list of tasks to complete, she would move slowly through the space, noticing what was happening. She would water when plants seemed thirsty, but she also trusted them to communicate their needs to her. She would remove weeds that were clearly problematic, but she also allowed some volunteer plants to grow if they seemed to be contributing to the garden's overall health. You find yourself imagining this approach to gardening, and perhaps recognizing how it might apply to other areas of life. A way of being engaged and caring without being controlling or anxious. As the seasons passed, the differences between the two gardens became apparent. Alexios's garden, despite all his effort and expertise, was struggling. His exotic plants required constant intervention to survive in their non-native environment. His precisely planned layout, which had looked perfect on paper, created unexpected problems. Some plants blocking others from needed sunlight, root systems interfering with each other in ways he hadn't anticipated. The more problems that arose, the harder Alexios worked to solve them. He bought expensive fertilizers, installed complex watering systems, spent hours each day maintaining his elaborate design. The garden became not a source of joy, but a source of stress. Beautiful in some ways, but demanding constant vigilance and intervention. Cleo's garden, meanwhile, seemed to thrive with much less effort. Because she had chosen plants suited to her local conditions, they required less water, less fertilizer, less protection from weather. Because she had worked with the natural patterns of her land, water flowed where it was needed, and plants settled into relationships that supported, rather than competed with each other. More surprisingly, Cleo's garden seemed to become more beautiful over time with less intervention, not more. As the plants matured and found their natural relationships with each other, the garden developed a kind of wild beauty that felt both cultivated and effortless. The temple bells chime again in the distance, and you realize that time has been passing without your awareness of it. Not because you're bored, but because you're so present to the story that you've lost track of everything except this moment. This voice, this gentle unfolding of wisdom. One evening, as both neighbors were working in their gardens, they struck up a conversation across the fence that separated their properties. Alexios, who was busy adjusting his irrigation system, looked over at Cleo, who was simply sitting quietly on a small bench, enjoying the evening light on her plants. "I don't understand," Alexios said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I work so much harder than you do. I've invested in the best plants and the most sophisticated systems. I follow all the expert advice. But your garden seems to flourish while mine constantly needs attention. What am I doing wrong?" Cleo looked at her neighbor with kindness. She could see how much effort he put into his garden, and she could also see how much stress it was causing him. "Perhaps," she said gently, "the question isn't whether you're doing something wrong, but whether you're trying to do too much." "What do you mean?" Alexios asked. "Well," Cleo replied thoughtfully, "I've noticed that when I try to force my garden to be something it's not naturally inclined to be, both the garden and I suffer. But when I pay attention to what the garden wants to become and support that natural inclination, both the garden and I thrive." "But surely good gardening requires knowledge, planning, effort," Alexios protested. "Of course," Cleo agreed. "But there's a difference between supportive effort and controlling effort. I put energy into understanding my garden's natural patterns and working with them. You put energy into overriding your garden's natural patterns and replacing them with your own ideas about how things should be." This distinction between supportive effort and controlling effort seems to hang in the air like a bell that has been struck, its meaning reverberating through various areas of life beyond gardening. Alexios was quiet for a moment, considering this. "Are you saying I should just let my garden run wild? Just plant things randomly and hope for the best?" "Not at all," Cleo smiled. "There's a middle way between forcing and abandoning. I'm suggesting that you might consider working with your garden's nature rather than against it. Pay attention to what's already working and support that. Notice what's struggling despite your best efforts, and consider whether those particular plants or designs are suited to your particular conditions." "But I've invested so much in this approach," Alexios said. "If I change now, won't I be wasting all the work I've already done?" Cleo considered this thoughtfully. Sometimes the most efficient thing we can do is to stop doing something inefficient, even if we've already invested heavily in it. Your garden will benefit from whatever genuine care you've already given it, but it might benefit even more from a different kind of care going forward. That night, Alexios lay awake thinking about his conversation with Cleo. He realized that his approach to gardening reflected his approach to many things in life. Always striving, always trying to control outcomes, always pushing against resistance rather than looking for the path of less struggle. The next morning, instead of rushing out with his usual list of tasks, Alexios tried something different. He sat quietly in his garden, just observing, as Cleo had suggested. For the first time in months, he really looked at his plants, not to identify problems to fix, but simply to see what was actually happening. He noticed that some of his exotic plants, despite all his care, looked stressed and unhappy, but he also noticed that some native plants had volunteered in corners of his garden, and these were thriving with no care at all. He saw that his rigid watering schedule was overwatering some plants while underwatering others, and that his carefully planned layout was creating crowded conditions in some areas while leaving other areas sparse and unbalanced. For the first time since he'd started his garden, Alexios felt curious rather than critical about what he was seeing. Instead of immediately jumping into action to fix problems, he found himself wondering what his garden was trying to teach him. The story seems to be settling into your awareness like soil receiving rain, not rushing or flooding, but soaking in gradually, naturally, nourishing something deeper than surface understanding. Over the following weeks, Alexios began to experiment with Cleo's approach. He moved some of his struggling exotic plants to areas that might suit them better, and if they continued to struggle, he replaced them with native alternatives. He simplified his irrigation system, watering more by observation than by schedule. He allowed some of the volunteer plants to stay and grow, curious to see what they might contribute. Most surprisingly to him, he found that this new approach was not only more effective, but also more enjoyable. Gardening became less like work and more like a conversation, a daily dialogue between his intentions and his garden's responses. By the end of the season, both gardens were beautiful but in different ways. Alexios's garden had become more natural-looking, while still being clearly cultivated. It required less daily intervention, but seemed more alive, more resilient, more in harmony with its surroundings. And Alexios himself had changed as well. He found that the patience and attention he'd learned in the garden began to influence other areas of his life. He became less anxious about controlling outcomes and more interested in understanding natural patterns and working with them. When friends asked him about his gardening philosophy, Alexios would smile and say, "I learned that the most beautiful gardens grow when you combine intention with attention, effort with ease, planning with presence. The secret isn't to do more or less, but to do differently, to work with life rather than against it." Xenophanes pauses again, and in the silence you can hear how the evening sounds have deepened even further. The breeze has softened to barely a whisper, the temple bells have grown quieter, and even your own breathing has slowed to match the peaceful rhythm of the story. "And that," he says softly, "is the second story I wanted to share with you tonight. A reminder that wisdom often lies not in doing more, but in paying attention to how we do what we do, and in learning to work with the natural flow of life, rather than constantly swimming against its current." The sky above has deepened to the color of lavender honey, and the first stars are beginning to appear between the olive leaves. You've been sitting with Xenophanes for what feels like both minutes and hours. Time has taken on that quality it has during the most peaceful moments, when you're so present that duration becomes irrelevant. Xenophanes seems to be savoring this transition from day to evening, watching as shadows lengthen and the quality of light becomes softer, more golden, more conducive to the kind of deep reflection that his final story will invite. "The third and final story I want to share with you tonight," he says, his voice now carrying the particular gentleness that comes with approaching sleep, "is perhaps the most important of all. It's about the difference between knowledge and understanding, between information and wisdom, between knowing about peace and actually being peaceful." He shifts slightly on the bench, settling in for what you sense will be the longest and most contemplative of the evening's tales. Around you, the academy grounds have grown quieter as evening deepens. Other students and teachers have departed for their homes, leaving just you and Xenophanes and the ancient olive tree in the gathering dusk. This story takes place here in Athens, but in an older Athens than the one Sophia knew. It was a time when the city was smaller, more intimate, when everyone knew their neighbors, and philosophy was practiced not in grand schools, but in quiet corners where friends gathered to share insights about life. In those days, there lived a young man named Dionysius, not the famous tyrant you may have heard of, but a scholar, a collector of wisdom. Dionysius had what many would consider a perfect life. He was wealthy enough to pursue learning without worry about earning a living, intelligent enough to understand even the most complex philosophical arguments, and motivated enough to spend his days studying with the greatest teachers of his time. The sound of water from the nearby fountain seems to have grown more prominent as other sounds have faded, creating a gentle, rhythmic backdrop that enhances rather than distracts from the story. Dionysius had read every scroll in Athens, memorized the teachings of dozens of philosophers, and could recite arguments and counter-arguments on every major question of ethics, metaphysics, and natural philosophy. He was known throughout the city as one of the most learned young men of his generation. But despite all his knowledge, Dionysius was not happy. In fact, the more he learned, the more anxious he became. Each new teaching seemed to contradict something he had learned before. Each philosopher claimed to have the truth, but their truths were often incompatible. Dionysius found himself carrying around a mind full of brilliant ideas that seemed to cancel each other out, leaving him more confused than when he had started. You might recognize something familiar in Dionysius's predicament, the modern equivalent of having access to endless information, but struggling to find genuine wisdom, of being well-informed, but not necessarily well-oriented in life. One evening, after a particularly frustrating day of trying to reconcile contradictory teachings about the nature of virtue, Dionysius decided to take a walk outside the city walls to clear his head. He found himself on a path that led up into the hills, where small temples and shrines dotted the landscape like stars scattered across the earth. As he walked, still mentally arguing with various philosophical positions, Dionysius noticed a soft light coming from one of the smaller temples ahead. This wasn't one of the grand famous temples that attracted crowds and ceremonies, but a modest structure that seemed almost to grow out of the hillside itself. Curious, and perhaps hoping for some new teaching that might resolve his confusion, Dionysius approached the temple. As he drew closer, he could see that the light came from a few simple oil lamps placed around a small altar, and sitting quietly before the altar, in perfect stillness, was an elderly woman. Xenophanes pauses here, and in the silence you become aware of how deeply relaxed you've become. Your body feels heavy in the most pleasant way, settled completely into the warm stone bench, and your mind has that quality of alert rest that comes when you're fully absorbed in something peaceful. The woman was not reading, not praying in any way that Dionysius recognized, not even meditating in the formal sense. She was simply sitting quietly, her hands resting in her lap, her breathing slow and natural, her expression peaceful but alert. There was something about her presence that immediately calmed the mental chatter that had been troubling Dionysius all day. He stood at the entrance to the temple for several minutes, not wanting to disturb her, but also reluctant to leave. Finally, the woman opened her eyes and looked at him with a gentle smile. "Come in, young scholar," she said softly. "You look like someone carrying heavy thoughts." Dionysius entered the simple temple, immediately struck by its atmosphere of profound calm. Unlike the grand temples in the city, with their elaborate decorations and constant activity, this space felt almost empty, but empty in the way that a clear sky feels empty, full of infinite possibility rather than lacking anything essential. "How did you know I was a scholar?" Dionysius asked as he sat down near the woman. "Your forehead," she replied with a gentle laugh. "It has the particular furrows that come from thinking very hard about very complicated things. I had the same expression for many years, until I learned a different way of approaching wisdom." A different way? Dionysius was immediately interested. "Are you a teacher? Do you follow a particular school of philosophy?" "I suppose you could say I'm a student of the Temple of Quiet Understanding," the woman replied, "though it's not a school in the way you might think of schools." "I've never heard of it," said Dionysius. "Where is this temple? Who is the master teacher?" The woman gestured gently around the simple space where they sat. "You're in it now. And as for the master teacher," she paused, looking at him with eyes that seemed to contain depths of understanding. "The master teacher is the same one that teaches the birds to sing and the rivers to flow, the one that taught your heart to beat before you were born, and will teach your breath to be peaceful when you learn to stop forcing it." Dionysius felt something shift in his understanding, though he couldn't yet articulate what it was. The woman's words pointed toward something beyond the philosophical systems he was familiar with, something more fundamental than theories and arguments. "I don't understand," he said honestly. "I've studied with the Stoics and the Epicureans, with followers of Pythagoras and students of Heraclitus. I've learned about virtue and pleasure, about mathematics and natural philosophy, but I still don't feel wise. I feel more confused than ever. What is this different way you speak of?" The woman was quiet for a long moment, not as if she were formulating an answer, but as if she were allowing space for the question to settle and for the answer to arise naturally. "Tell me, Dionysius," she said finally, "in all your studies, have you ever learned how to be quiet?" Quiet? The question puzzled him. "I study in quiet places. I think quietly. I read silently." "Ah," said the woman, "but that's not the same thing. What I mean is, have you ever learned to let your mind be completely still, not thinking about philosophy, not analyzing or comparing or judging, but simply quiet?" Dionysius realized that he had never experienced what she was describing. Even when he wasn't actively studying, his mind was always busy, reviewing what he had learned, planning what to study next, comparing different ideas, arguing with teachers he disagreed with. "No," he admitted, "I don't think I have. Is that important?" "It may be the most important thing of all," the woman replied gently. "You see, all the knowledge you've accumulated is like having a very large library. That's wonderful. Libraries are precious things. But if you never learn to be quiet, it's like having a library in a room where dozens of people are always talking at once. You can't actually hear the wisdom the books contain because of all the noise." This metaphor seems to land with particular resonance, and you might find yourself thinking about the constant mental chatter that often prevents you from accessing your own deeper wisdom. "The Temple of Quiet Understanding," the woman continued, "teaches something that comes before philosophy, something that makes all philosophy more useful. It teaches the art of inner stillness, not as an end in itself, but as the foundation that allows real wisdom to emerge." "But how does one learn to be quiet in that way?" Dionysius asked. Surely it requires some technique, some method. The most profound methods are often the simplest. The woman replied, Would you like to try? Dionysius nodded eagerly, though part of him wondered if he was about to be disappointed by something too simple to be valuable. Very well, said the woman. For the next few minutes, I invite you to do something very unusual for a scholar. Try not to learn anything. Don't try to understand what I'm about to show you. Don't analyze it or compare it to other teachings. Simply experience it. She gestured for him to sit more comfortably, to let his hands rest naturally, to allow his breathing to find its own rhythm without controlling it. Now, she said, I want you to listen. Not to my words. I'm going to be quiet, but to the silence underneath all the sounds around us. Listen for the space between the cricket songs, the pause between your heartbeats, the stillness that holds all movement. Xenophanes' voice has grown even softer as he tells this part of the story, and you realize that he's creating the same experience for you that the woman created for Dionysius. You find yourself naturally listening not just to his words, but to the silence that contains them. For the first few minutes, Dionysius struggled. His mind kept generating thoughts about what he was supposed to be experiencing, questions about the purpose of the exercise, comparisons to other meditative practices he had heard about. But gradually, as the woman's presence seemed to model a deeper kind of stillness, something in him began to settle. It was subtle at first, just moments when the mental commentary would pause, like gaps in clouds through which he could glimpse clear sky. But these moments of quiet began to last longer, and in them, Dionysius began to experience something he had never encountered in all his philosophical studies. It wasn't a new idea or a brilliant insight. It wasn't information or argument or analysis. It was more like recognition, as if he were remembering something he had always known but had forgotten. A sense of basic okayness that didn't depend on having the right answers or understanding the right concepts. When the woman finally spoke again, her voice seemed to come from within the stillness rather than breaking it. What did you notice? She asked gently. Dionysius found it difficult to put his experience into words. I'm not sure, he said slowly. It felt like coming home to myself, like remembering who I am underneath all the things I've learned and all the questions I've been carrying. Yes, the woman smiled. That's the beginning of the kind of understanding this temple teaches. Not understanding that comes from accumulating more information, but understanding that comes from returning to what you already are, underneath all the complexity. But how does this relate to philosophy? Dionysius asked. I mean, it feels peaceful, but does it actually help with the real questions about how to live? What's virtuous? What's true? Ah, said the woman. Now you're asking the right question. Let me ask you something. In that moment of quiet, did you feel anxious about not having all the answers? Dionysius considered this. No, actually. For the first time in months, I felt okay with not knowing everything. And in that state of being okay with not knowing, did you feel more or less capable of learning? More, he realized with surprise. Much more. It was like my mind had space to actually receive new ideas instead of being cluttered with old ones. Exactly. This is what the Temple of Quiet Understanding teaches, that wisdom begins not with having the right answers, but with having the right relationship to questions. When you're peaceful with not knowing, you become capable of real learning. When you're anxious about not having answers, you can only collect more information, not gain genuine understanding. The woman's words seem to illuminate something important about the learning process itself, and you might notice how your own receptivity to Xenophani's stories has been enhanced by the peaceful state you've settled into. Over the following weeks, Dionysius began visiting the temple regularly, not to study new teachings, but to practice what the woman called wise ignorance, the art of approaching questions with a quiet mind and an open heart. And gradually, something remarkable happened. All the philosophical teachings he had studied began to make sense in a new way, not because he learned additional information, but because he approached his existing knowledge from a state of inner stillness rather than inner agitation. The Stoic teachings about accepting what you cannot change became not just an intellectual concept, but a lived experience. The Epicurean insights about appreciating life's pleasures became not just a philosophy, but a natural capacity. The Socratic principle of knowing that you don't know became not just a logical position, but a doorway to continuous learning. It's like cleaning a window, Dionysius told the woman one evening. The view was always there, but I couldn't see it clearly because the glass was clouded with worry and mental noise. The teachings themselves didn't change, but my capacity to receive them did. Yes, the woman agreed, and this is the deepest teaching of the Temple of Quiet Understanding. Wisdom is not something you acquire from outside yourself, it's something you uncover within yourself by removing the obstacles to seeing clearly. But what about all the different schools of philosophy? Dionysius asked. They still seem to contradict each other, even when I approach them from a quiet mind. Do they? The woman asked gently. Or do they perhaps emphasize different aspects of the same deeper truth? When you're in a state of inner peace, do the Stoic emphasis on discipline and the Epicurean emphasis on joy really contradict each other? Or do they perhaps both point toward ways of living that support well-being? Dionysius pondered this. From his new perspective of inner stillness, the various philosophies began to look less like competing truth claims and more like different tools in a toolkit, each useful for different situations and different temperaments. The Temple of Quiet Understanding doesn't teach you what to think. The woman continued, it teaches you how to think, or more precisely, how to be present to life in a way that allows wisdom to emerge naturally from your own experience. As Xenophanes tells this part of the story, you might notice that your own mind has become very quiet, very receptive, very capable of taking in the wisdom being offered without the usual mental commentary or resistance. Years later, when Dionysius had become known as a wise teacher himself, people would ask him about his philosophy, expecting him to align with one school or another. But Dionysius would smile and say, I practice the philosophy of quiet understanding. It's not a set of beliefs or doctrines, but a way of approaching life with presence and peace. Where did you learn this philosophy? They would ask. In a small temple on a hill outside Athens, he would reply, but the temple wasn't a building. It was a quality of attention, and the teacher wasn't a person. It was the stillness that emerges when you stop trying so hard to figure everything out and start paying attention to what's actually here, in this moment. Can you teach us this philosophy? They would ask. I can point you toward the temple, Dionysius would say. But like all real temples, it's not a place you go to. It's a place you discover within yourself. And the only way to find it is to be very, very quiet and listen for what's already there. The story seems to settle into the evening air like incense, fragrant and subtle and somehow transformative just through its presence. You realize that through the simple act of listening to these tales, you've been practicing exactly what the story describes, approaching wisdom through quiet attention rather than effortful analysis. And that, Xenophanes says, his voice now barely above a whisper, is the third and final story I wanted to share with you tonight. The stars are now fully visible, scattered across the deep purple sky like ancient coins dropped by travelers from distant lands. The academy has grown profoundly quiet, with only the gentlest sounds remaining. The soft whisper of wind through olive leaves, the distant murmur of water over stones, and the peaceful rhythm of your own breathing, slower now than when the evening began. Xenophanes sits in comfortable silence for a long moment, and you find yourself naturally doing the same. There's a sense of completion, but also of something new beginning, as if the stories have opened a door to a deeper kind of rest than you've known before. 3 stories, he says finally, so softly that his voice seems to come from the evening itself rather than from any particular person. 3 different paths that all lead to the same ancient recognition, that the peace we seek is not something distant or difficult to attain, but something as close and natural as our own breath when we stop trying to control it. The evening air has cooled to that perfect temperature that makes you naturally want to settle deeper, to let go of any remaining tension, to surrender to the kind of rest that heals not just the body, but the spirit as well. But there is one more place I would like to take you before we part ways tonight. Xenophanes continues, rising slowly from the bench with the unhurried grace of someone who has learned that every movement can be a meditation, a place that exists not just here in this academy, but in every heart that has learned to be truly still. You find yourself rising with him, your body feeling wonderfully heavy and relaxed, as if you're moving through warm honey rather than air. The ancient olive tree seems to nod its blessing as you pass beneath its branches, and you realize that you'll carry the peace of this place with you wherever you go. Xenophanes leads you along a path you haven't walked before, even more winding and gentle than the ones that brought you here. This path seems to spiral slowly inward, not toward any external destination, but toward something deeper and more intimate, the quiet center that exists within consciousness itself. The Greeks had a word, he says as you walk, that has no perfect translation in any other language. They called it henosis, a state of unity, of coming home to oneself, of remembering that the seeker and the sought are not 2 different things, but one awareness looking at itself with loving eyes. The path leads through a grove of ancient trees, their trunks so old and wide that they seem more like gentle giants than plants. Fireflies begin to appear as you walk, their soft light creating a natural constellation at eye level, as if the stars themselves have descended to guide your way. This grove, Xenophanes explains, exists in that liminal space between waking and sleeping, between day and night, between the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and the deeper truth of what we actually are underneath all our stories. You notice that with each step, the boundaries between yourself and the evening seem to grow softer. The distinction between the sounds around you and the silence within you becomes less clear. The fireflies might be dancing in the air, or they might be thoughts of light moving through the peaceful darkness of your own consciousness. Every night, Xenophanes continues, when human beings around the world surrender to sleep, they enter this same sacred grove. They may not realize it consciously, but in the moments between waking and sleeping, between thought and no thought, they touch the same peace that Sophia found by the stream, the same naturalness that Cleo discovered in her garden, the same quiet understanding that transformed Dionysius in the temple. The path opens into a circular clearing, completely enclosed by the ancient trees. In the center of the clearing is something you can only describe as a natural amphitheater, concentric circles of soft grass that seem to invite the deepest possible rest. The fireflies gather here too, creating a dome of gentle light overhead, like the most peaceful planetarium imaginable. This is the sacred grove of dreams, Xenophanes says, settling onto the soft grass and gesturing for you to do the same. Not dreams as we usually think of them, the busy, often chaotic movies that sometimes play behind our eyelids, but the deeper dreaming that happens when consciousness rests so completely that it remembers its own nature. You settle onto the grass beside him, and immediately you feel held by the earth itself, supported so completely that every muscle in your body can finally, fully relax. The grass is softer than any bed, the temperature perfect, the sounds around you like the most soothing lullaby ever composed. In this sacred space, Xenophanes continues, his voice now so gentle it might be coming from inside your own peaceful heart. All the wisdom traditions of the world recognize the same truth, that we don't need to become something other than what we are to find peace. We need only to stop pretending to be something other than what we naturally are when all the doing and striving and seeking finally comes to rest. The fireflies overhead pulse in slow, synchronized rhythms, like the breathing of some vast, benevolent presence. You realize that you've been naturally matching this rhythm with your own breath, each exhalation releasing not just air, but any remaining tension, any lingering concerns about tomorrow or regrets about yesterday. The ancient Greeks understood something that we sometimes forget in our busy modern world. Xenophanes says, they knew that the deepest learning doesn't happen through accumulating more information, but through returning to a state of original innocence. Not the innocence of ignorance, but the innocence of wisdom that has remembered its own source. Sophia learned this by the stream, when she stopped trying to find the right philosophy and simply allowed herself to be present. Alexios discovered it in his garden when he stopped trying to force beauty and started listening to what wanted to emerge naturally. Dionysius found it in the temple when he stopped trying to understand everything and started resting in the space where understanding happens by itself. The stars above seem closer now, as if the dome of the sky has lowered to embrace this sacred grove. You feel yourself becoming part of this ancient rhythm, this eternal cycle of rest and renewal that has been going on for millions of years and will continue long after all current worries and concerns have dissolved back into the peace from which they arose. And now, Xenophanes whispers, you are discovering it too, not as something new that you need to learn, but as something ancient that you have always known but perhaps temporarily forgotten. The peace that is your true nature. The wisdom that emerges when the mind becomes as still as a mountain lake at dawn. The love that flows naturally when the heart is no longer defending itself against an imaginary enemy. The fireflies begin to dim, not disappearing, but settling into a gentle, steady glow that perfectly matches the quiet light of consciousness itself when it's no longer agitated by the need to be anywhere other than right here, in this moment, exactly as it is. This grove, Xenophanes says, is always available to you, not as a place you need to travel to, but as a quality of awareness you can return to any time you remember to stop. Breathe deeply and allow yourself to settle into the natural peace that exists at the center of your being. When you wake tomorrow, you may not remember all the details of the stories I've shared tonight, but you will carry with you something more valuable than memory: the lived experience of what it feels like to be completely at peace, completely present, completely okay with yourself and the world, exactly as they are. The grove seems to pulse gently with this truth, the trees swaying almost imperceptibly, the grass beneath you feeling more supportive with each passing moment. You realize that you're already beginning to drift towards sleep, not as an escape from awareness, but as a deepening into a more fundamental kind of consciousness, the awareness that continues even when the thinking mind has come to rest. Sleep now, Xenophanes whispers, his voice blending seamlessly with the evening sounds until you can no longer tell where his words end and the natural lullaby of the grove begins. Sleep with the philosophers and the poets, with all the seekers who have found their way to this eternal place of rest. Sleep knowing that you are held by the same love that holds the stars in their courses and the seasons in their cycles. Let your dreams be filled not with anxiety or effort, but with the same gentle wisdom that has been flowing through these stories tonight. Let yourself rest so deeply that you remember what it feels like to be completely, utterly, perfectly yourself. Not the self that worries or strives or doubts, but the self that is pure awareness, pure peace, pure loving presence. The fireflies settle into a steady, barely perceptible glow, like night lights in the most peaceful bedroom imaginable. The sounds of the grove fade to the barest whisper, creating a cocoon of silence that feels both protective and infinitely spacious. And when morning comes, Xenophanes' voice is now barely distinguishable from the sound of your own peaceful breathing. You will wake refreshed not just in body, but in spirit. You will carry with you the memory of this ancient peace, not as something you once experienced, but as something you always are, underneath all the temporary movements of thought and emotion. This is the gift of the ancient Greek wisdom, not philosophy as mere intellectual exercise, but as a living transmission of what it means to be fully human, fully awake, fully at peace with the mystery of existence itself. The grove fades gently around you, not disappearing, but becoming so perfectly integrated with your own consciousness that there's no longer any sense of separation between the sacred space and your own sacred heart. You are the grove now, and the grove is you, and all of it is held in the same vast, loving awareness that has been the true subject of every story told tonight. In the deepest part of the sacred grove of dreams, where the distinction between sleeping and waking becomes as soft as moonlight on water, you find yourself cradled by a peace so complete that it seems to have no beginning and no end. This is not the peace that comes from the absence of activity, but the peace that is present even within activity, the unchanging awareness in which all experiences arise and subside like waves on the surface of an infinite ocean. Xenophanes is no longer beside you in any way you could point to, yet his presence has become so integrated with the evening itself that every gentle sound, every soft sensation, every naturally arising thought carries the same quality of loving wisdom that flowed through his stories. The teacher and the teaching have become one seamless experience of returning home to yourself. The ancient olive tree from the academy seems to extend its branches over this entire grove, creating a canopy of protection that spans not just physical space, but time itself, connecting you to every seeker who has ever found their way to this place of ultimate rest, and every seeker who ever will. You are part of an eternal lineage of beings who have discovered that the peace they sought was never absent, only temporarily overlooked. Your breathing has become so natural, so effortless, that it feels as though the entire grove is breathing with you, the trees inhaling starlight and exhaling tranquility, the earth itself rising and falling with the rhythm of some vast cosmic respiration that includes your own small, precious breath as an essential note in an infinite symphony. The wisdom of Sophia, who learned that peace is not a destination, but a way of traveling, lives in your body now as a cellular memory of how to be present without grasping, how to seek without desperation, how to question without anxiety. Her discovery by the stream has become your own discovery, here in this moment, that you are already exactly where you need to be. The insight of the two gardens, that beautiful things grow best when we combine intention with attention, effort with ease, has taken root in your nervous system like the most nourishing truth. You can feel it settling into your bones, the knowing that life works best when we work with it, that the most sustainable beauty emerges from partnership rather than domination, that wisdom lies not in doing more, but in attending more carefully to how we do what we do. And Dionysius's revelation in the Temple of Quiet Understanding has become your own lived experience tonight. You've discovered that beneath all the mental noise, beneath all the questions and concerns and plans and memories, there exists a quality of awareness so spacious and peaceful that it can hold everything without being disturbed by anything. This awareness is not something you achieve or acquire. It's what you are, what you've always been, what you could never stop being, even if you tried. As sleep draws closer, you feel yourself settling not just into rest, but into recognition. The sacred grove of dreams reveals itself as both the most intimate and the most universal space imaginable, as close as your own heart, as vast as the cosmos itself. Here, in this liminal space between day and night, between effort and ease, between seeking and finding, all the apparent contradictions of existence resolve into a single, simple truth. You are loved. You are whole. You are home. The fireflies have dimmed to the barest suggestion of light, like candle flames seen through gossamer curtains. They don't disappear because they were never really separate from the consciousness that perceived them. Everything you've experienced tonight, the academy, the stories, the grove, the peace, has been a dance of awareness with itself. Love recognizing love, the part of you that seeks coming home to the part of you that has never been lost. Your last conscious thought, if it can even be called a thought, is not a thought at all, but a feeling of such profound gratitude that it seems to transform into light itself. Gratitude for the ancient wisdom that has been preserved across millennia so that it could find you here, in this moment. Gratitude for your own willingness to listen, to receive, to allow yourself to be transformed by something so gentle yet so profound. Gratitude for the mystery that allows consciousness to know itself through countless forms, while never forgetting its essential unity. Sleep comes not as a loss of consciousness, but as consciousness recognizing its own natural state of rest. You drift into dreams that are not separate from waking wisdom, but are waking wisdom expressed in the language of symbols and metaphors and pure feeling. Your sleep becomes a continuation of the ancient Greek academy, where learning happens not through effort, but through grace, where wisdom is not accumulated but remembered, where peace is not achieved but acknowledged as what you have already been, and in the deepest reaches of the night, where even dreams dissolve into pure rest, the olive tree continues its patient vigil. The stars maintain their eternal dance, and the same love that inspired Sophia and guided the gardeners and illuminated Dionysius holds you in its inexhaustible embrace until morning comes and you wake refreshed in body and soul, carrying the precious gift of having touched the timeless heart of ancient wisdom and found it beating in perfect rhythm with your own. The sacred grove of dreams remains always available, not as a memory of somewhere you once visited, but as the very ground of being in which every moment of your life takes place. You are already home. Rest now, dear friend, in the eternal embrace of ancient wisdom and infinite love.